Hannah, National Historic Ships UK, we're on a historic vessel and this is an absolute cracker. Tell me about Medusa.
Yeah, we certainly are. Well, Medusa is a member of our National Historic Fleet. So that is the currently 200 vessels which have been deemed the best representatives of their type, and therefore they merit the highest priority in terms of conservation. And if you ask me why is Medusa on the National Historic Fleet, well, she is the last surviving vessel that took part in the D-Day landings at Omaha Beach. So she's definitely pretty special. And
she's not the best representative of her class. She's the only surviving ship of her class. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the case of Medusa, she is the only surviving HDML.
Yeah. Which is what does HDML stand for?
A Harbour Defence Motor Launch.
And so we'll find out a little more from Alan, I think, about her exact details. But do you know much about her history or what she was actually involved in?
Well, she was built in 1943 in Poole, and so she was obviously a central part of the war efforts. As I said, she was at the D-Day landings. I think she was marking the navigational approaches to Omaha Beach. And then another claim to fame, she went on to be the first Allied vessel into Amsterdam after the surrender. So. Yeah, she's had a pretty distinguished career.
Yeah, for all of our listeners out there, we're definitely going to find some more out about the operational history of the Medusa. But for now, let's talk about National Historic Ships. How long has it been set up? What was the kind of the motivation behind setting it all up?
Yeah, so National Historic Ships came formally into being back in 2006 when we got funding from the government. Really, the motivation was to carry on some work that began in the early 1990s to set up the National Historic Ship Registers. This is a set of databases that categorise the surviving historic vessels around the UK.
Yeah. So let's just stop there because it's amazing. Prior to that, there was no register of historic vessels in the UK. There was no money to help people kind of come up with conservation plans. The whole sort of British historic fleet had been more or less forgotten.
Well, that's not strictly true. I think, we are an island nation. We've got a very proud and strong maritime past. But what I would say is before that people were saving vessels on more of an ad hoc basis. So you'd get, some fantastic conservation efforts from individual groups. But there was no sort of strategic effort or strategic overview of what was happening in the UK in terms of historic ships, what should be saved, what's more important, where should, for example, public money be going. And so really that's what National Historic Ships came into being to do, partly to be a voice for the sector, to support the people out there doing the conservation work, but also to act as an advisor to government and to bodies like the National Lottery Heritage Fund, so that we can help to make sure that, the vessels that are really important, that are the only one of their type, are being saved.
Yeah. Give me an example of some of the exciting projects that you're working on now.
Well, actually at the moment we are working slightly more on the skills side, because what we quickly realised when we were first set up was that it's not enough to save the vessels, because actually if you don't save the supporting infrastructure, the skills and the services that go into conserving and maintaining vessels like this, you may as well not have the vessel, because you really do need the people to work on it and the materials and those facilities and spaces where they can be dry docked and etc. So yeah, we've started a number of projects where we've been actually focusing on the traditional maritime skills, and in fact this week is Traditional Skills Week for us.
Ah, right, okay.
And we're out there on social media, we're promoting all types of maritime skills on the back end of a National Lottery Heritage funded project which we've been running since 2014, and this is a scheme that's been to bring younger people into the sector. So we've actually hosted now 26 training placements since 2014 for young people aged between 18 to 30, and those people have had that chance to go on board a historic vessel, to be on a placement over a 12-month period and to learn what goes into conserving, maintaining and operating these craft.
Yeah, it's interesting coming on the Medusa how bewildering the number of skills required are. So I mean, this obviously has an engine, but it's got all the same problems of navigating, and there's rope around the whole vessel's made of wood. So there's so many different requirements there. But then if you go on a sailing boat like a yawl or a schooner, whatever it might be, you're confronted with all the rigging, and it all requires specialist knowledge. It's quite alarming the amount of skills you need, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a bit of a portfolio, and I think what's interesting about the registers that we maintain is that there are so many different ships and boats on those registers. You know, we've got everything from lifeboats to canal boats to, you know, warships to passenger carrying craft and cargo craft to yachts. There's everything you can think of really that represent the sort of full spectrum of British maritime history.
Yeah.
And so obviously there's a base level of skills and understanding and kind of specialist knowledge that you need to look after those craft, but then also there is the sort of skills peculiar to each individual vessel type.
Yeah.
So if you've got a sailing vessel, you need to know about traditional rigs. If you've got a vessel like Medusa, obviously you need some marine engineering knowledge. So it is, you know, it is very specialist. And what we've tried to do in the training scheme that we're just coming out of now, we've actually offered 2 training routes. So we've been focusing particularly on the operational sailing vessels. So people have been able to go on board and learn traditional seafaring skills on board an operational yacht or with either a gaff, a lug or a sprit rig. And that's been their kind of focus. And then other trainees have chosen to go down a museum shipkeeping route, and that's been about trying to upskill the people that work in museums and look after historic vessels who may have an excellent knowledge of collections management and that type of thing, but have never had that practical opportunity to actually do any maintenance or go out on and operate one of those vessels. So it's bringing those practical skills into the museums.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear actually. And when we walked here, we're at Portsmouth Historic Dockyard for all of you those listening, and we walked through the boathouse number 4 where there was loads of people working on the traditional maritime crafts. It was wonderful to see and to hear. There was quite a lot of hammering going on, wasn't there?
Yeah, no, well, Boathouse 4 is a great place to visit, and it's actually got the International Boat Building and Training College, Portsmouth, based here at Boathouse 4, and it's also one of the hubs of what we call the Shipshape network. So back in 2010 we set up the Shipshape network, which was again to focus on those traditional skills, but also to try and connect people across the sector who are doing training projects, who perhaps are conserving a historic vessel, who are doing any kind of maritime heritage activity. And what we found is that people are often doing their project almost in isolation, and they don't realise that perhaps there's another group, you know, a few miles down the coast doing something very similar, and actually getting together, sharing knowledge, sharing ideas can also help them enormously. So our network is about connecting those sort of disparate groups around the coast, and because we are London based but we cover the whole UK and we've got a relatively small team, we felt like actually what we need are organisations that we can almost partner with, who can be our ambassadors on the ground. And so we've now got 5 shipshape hubs, as we're calling them, of which Boathouse 4 is one. So these are organisations out there in the different zones of the network who can pull together projects that are happening locally. They can provide events space, they can support people as they're conserving their vessels, and just boost that sort of skills knowledge at a local level.
Very impressive. So all of this is sort of going on alongside the National Register, the historic fleet. You said there were 200 vessels on that in that historic fleet. What does it take to get put on the register? How do you get put on the register?
Well, it's not as complicated as you might imagine. We actually have a sort of set of databases. So the National Register of Historic Vessels is our core database. There's about 1,300 vessels on there at the moment. And then from that, we pull the National Historic Fleet, which are, as I say, the 200 sort of best surviving representatives of their type. To get onto that basic register, you've just got to meet some simple criteria. So your vessel has to be over 33 feet in length overall. So we tend to deal with the slightly larger vessels. There is a national small boat register that exists for anything under that length, which is managed by the National Maritime Museum in Cornwall. So you have to be over 33 feet in length overall. You have to be over 50 years of age. The vessel has to be substantially intact in UK waters and of UK significance or built in the UK. And provided you can sort of tick those boxes, it's a pretty straight path onto the basic register.
What was the most recently added?
Oh, you've got me there, but
Okay.
I would say nip onto our website, because on our homepage, we do have at the bottom of the homepage, we have all the latest registrations and they pop up there as they update. So we're sort of continually adding. I think we added about 30 new vessels to the main register last year. So it is a sort of cyclical process, and as vessels come of age, they will apply and come onto the register.
Well, Medusa's clearly afloat. We've had a wonderful time sailing out with her. But, nearby there are other historic vessels which are not so lucky, are there?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's perhaps not so lucky, but I think, groups that are looking after these vessels have to make a choice about whether they're going to conserve them as an operational craft, or whether perhaps they're going to preserve them, put them into a static environment where they're less likely to deteriorate, and they'll be there for future generations to enjoy. Yeah. And we certainly have a mix on the registers of both types of craft, and there are plenty that are there in museums for the public to go and enjoy. Yeah.
Most famous, I think, HMS Victory. There's a static one for you.
Yes, absolutely. And just down the road here, she obviously is hugely well known and undergoing a massive conservation programme at the moment that will hopefully see her secure for many years to come. Yeah.
And the Peggy in the Isle of Man is one that I'm particularly fond of. Tell me about that.
Yes, she's a fascinating vessel. Built from the late 18th century, and what was really interesting about her is that she was discovered in a cellar on the Isle of Man. Yeah. And she'd been lying there sort of unknown for several hundred years, suddenly discovered and brought to light, and she really did shine a light on that period of history. When she operated as a yacht, I believe, for one of the wealthy families on the island. Yeah,
sort of perfectly preserved. And you've got your virtual awards ceremony coming up soon, haven't you? That's on the case. And one particular thing I'm interested in there is the wonderful photographic competition. Tell me about that.
Yes, that's a really nice initiative that we've sort of had running for about 10 years now, and we wanted to find a way to reach out to new audiences, because I think one of our first tasks as an organisation was to kind of get that buy-in from the sector, so that they realise that we're on their side, we're here to support them, we are the voice of historic vessels. But then having got that and built that relationship up with the owners of the vessels, actually what we wanted to do was to get maritime heritage out there, get it more widely recognised, and to remind people of their maritime past and the fact that these vessels are here for us all to enjoy. And so the photography competition was a really fun way to do that. So what we do is every year we have an annual photography competition, we have a theme, we encourage people to send their images in, and then we recognise them in our annual award ceremony. Obviously, prior to COVID, that was a sort of prestigious event in a nice maritime themed London location. Last year, by necessity, we made it into a virtual ceremony, and it was a huge success beyond our sort of wildest dreams. In a physical sense, we probably get about 100 people to something like that. Online, we had 2,500 views, and it, people writing in saying how much they'd enjoyed it and how they'd really got a sense of what we do as an organisation and also what the sector had to offer. Yeah.
And particularly, I think for the listeners out there, do check out the photography competition, because there's one way of getting inspired by historic vessels. It's by looking at these remarkable pictures, and such a mixture between such beautiful survivors of the past, but extreme talent in photography as well.
Yes, you're right. I mean, what's fantastic is that we'll get people entering from, young children just wanting to have a go, right up to the professional photographer. We get amateurs, we've had drone photography. It's been a real mix and some wonderful images that we can then use, to promote our sector as well, which is a really nice thing to be able to do.
So where would people find you online?
Well, obviously on our website, so that's www.nationalhistoricships.org.uk, but also on social media. We're very active across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We've been running a lot of campaigns. We've done Instagram takeovers last year. We do live chats for our distance learning course. We do a lot online. So we're very welcoming and open to people who want to get in touch, who want to find out more about these vessels, or vessel owners who just want to come to us for support or advice.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a pleasure.
Alan, tell me about the Medusa.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Medusa is 80-something years old now. She was built in 1943. She was built in Poole, so a local vessel. And the Navy actually built 464 of these.
Wow.
And the design concept was to stay offshore for long periods of time to keep submarines out of harbours. There was a fear that submarines would get in, cause chaos. And so this class of vessel would patrol at sea for months at a time. They've got the ability to detect a submarine and then deal with it if they find one.
And how did that detection work?
It's a thing called ASDIC. It's the forerunner of sonar. And underneath the vessel there used to be a dome which looked a bit like one of the old motorcycle sidecars.
Right.
And that was under there. And that put a pulse of sound in the water pointing forwards. And if it got a reflection back from a submarine, it could measure the range and the bearing of the submarine.
And then was that printed out on a piece of paper, or was it seen on a screen?
There's a chart recorder, so it's printed. The operator could hear it, and a skilled operator could tell the difference between the ping from a shoal of fish and a submarine.
Wow.
And then the chart plotter enabled you to do a simple calculation to determine the right time to drop the depth charge. Yeah. And we carry 6 depth charges.
I saw those. They're astern, aren't they? Tell me about those. How do they work?
They work on depth. Then the first thing you have to do with a key is set the depth that you wish them to go off at, anything between 50 and 500 feet.
500 feet, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. And a U-boat, some went down as deep as 700 feet, but the normal operational depth was no deeper than 500. Yeah. So it covered that range. And there was just a signal from the ASDIC operator when he'd got a continuous echo. We were above it. They were rolled over the side, and then the next task was get out of the way quickly.
So what was inside them? They're just crammed with explosives?
Crammed with explosives. And there's what's called a depth pistol. And so when they get to the depth that you set, they detonate.
And the shock wave, is that what sort of affected the submarine?
Yeah. Essentially, you have to get within 20 feet of the submarine to destroy it, or 100 feet to damage it.
Wow.
As these vessels were operating in relatively shallow water, then getting within 20 feet in the vertical wasn't too difficult. You just had to get the horizontal axes correct.
Yeah. And, so it was actually quite relatively easy to deal with once you'd found one?
Once you found it, yeah. But it's a big piece of water out there, you've got to find it first.
Yeah. So there were 400 and something of these, but this is the only one left?
This is the only one that's now in original condition, fully operational, operating original machinery. Around the world there's about 18 hulls left now, but most of them are houseboats. There's 2 working in New Zealand that have been kept pretty well. There's a few in restoration in the UK, but this is the only one at the moment that's fully working.
And what about her operational history? What do we know about that?
It's pretty impressive. She started out in Poole when she was built, and the first thing she did was went round to Scotland, as they all did, for working up crew training. On the way back she went into Falmouth and had special equipment fitted that was going to be for D-Day. And the next task was Slapton Sands for the D-Day practice assault. Exercise Fabius, which was the assault for Omaha. The other one, Tiger, the practice for Utah went very wrong. Then a few days later, then D-Day itself. And she was based at Portland by then. She left Portland on the morning of the 4th of June. That's 2 days before the invasion. And she had to go to an exact position, which was on the edge of the German minefield on the other side, and mark that position. And then the night before D-Day, the minesweepers homed on this vessel, went through and cut. And then she had to stay in the middle of that channel, which was only a quarter of a mile wide, in awful conditions, to act as a homing beacon for the whole invasion force.
Wow.
So essentially, if she'd been off station, then the Omaha invasion force would have sailed into a minefield.
How do they find the mines in the first place?
When they actually sweep the mines, there's different techniques for different sorts of mines. Most of the mines are what are called contact mines, and so they have a sinker on the seabed which reels out a length of cable, and the mine itself is held at a predetermined depth. And those are swept by using a serrated wire between 2 vessels, and it's just a big cheese cutter that goes through. And then there's such things as acoustic mines, which are reacting to the sound of ships' engines. They're swept by making a loud noise, so setting them off at a distance. And then there's the tricky ones, which are magnetic mines, which respond to the ship's magnetic signature. And they're swept by trailing a long cable and putting an electric pulse through it, and that will trigger the mine.
Wow, an entire science of maritime activity there.
It was absolutely cat and mouse all through the war. Every time the Germans came up with a development, we had to find a way of sweeping it, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so the technology moved on hugely.
Yeah, terrifying. How many crew on board?
12. 2 officers, 2 petty officers, and 8 others. And the 2 officers on here wartime, they were Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, which meant they were peacetime sailors, just taken into the Navy, put in the uniform, and pretty much told to get on with it.
It was remarkably spacious accommodation, or do you think it would have been pretty cramped and miserable on board?
The wardroom for the 2 officers is absolutely great.
Isn't it?
I love it. I live there. The 2 petty officers do quite well. They've got a cabin with their own heads in there, their own loo. And up forward, there's 6 bunks for 8 people. So you end up hot bunking.
Yeah.
But compared to sort of mainstream vessels of the day, which were still hammocks, to have your own bunk was pretty good going.
Yeah. And what about the story of the ship's restoration? How did that come about?
Well, it's been a bit of a continuous process. The one thing about this vessel is that she hasn't been put back because she's never changed. A lot of the historic vessels you see around the place operating now spent part of their life as houseboats and have been put back again. This one's quite unusual, in fact absolutely unique, because she's always looked like this. She's a bit Trigger's broom, because continuous work has been done on her for years and years. But this particular one, we did a major overhaul between 2005-2010, because she'd got to the point, bearing in mind these were designed for a 5-year life. Yeah. She was 60 and she was telling us something. We had a choice of put her in the shed and preserve her in the shed, or preserve her at sea. Yeah. One kept all the original fabric, but lost its soul. The other one kept its soul and lost some of the original fabric. And everybody said, you've got to keep one of these at sea. So that's what we did. Yeah. Not an easy task. We got some quotations and they were all the wrong side of 4 million.
Wow.
We were never going to raise that. And in the end, we took over a derelict boatyard, put it back in action, took on 15 apprentices, ran it as a training project for 5 years. And at the end of the time, the boatyard, which was destined to be a block of flats, was handed back as a working boatyard and still is.
Brilliant.
The youngsters got a career and we got the ship immaculately redone.
Everyone's happy.
Total cost 1.5 million.
Okay, so a quarter or so of what you were expecting.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful seeing her like this, but a bit of a headache, a bit concerning about what's going to happen in the future. I mean, it's run by a team of volunteers now. You've got to keep those volunteers coming, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, we have a little joke that we're going to put a strapline under the name of the trust saying keeping Grandad out of the care home. And it's not entirely funny because none of us are getting any younger. We find that young people are interested, but it's a transitory interest. They want to come out and have a trip, experience it, and then move on to something else. Yeah. And we've accepted that the volunteers that come to us will all be people that have recently retired. They've got the time, they've got the skills, and that works. As long as we can keep that intake and sort of keep refreshing the crew, we can keep going. Yeah. Vessel herself, when we did the 5-year update on her, we did that to try and give her a 60-year operational life. And probably the most critical thing are the engines, which are 80 years old now, and we just nurse those gently. But she should be good for a long time.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. I think you've done a wonderful job here. It's a great project.
Thank you.